oftentimes people talk about trust being one of the most important currencies in our world today. And I actually say that in my book, Whole Leaders Wild Trust. And there's times where I actually feel like it's more than currency. It's the foundation upon which currency stands. Like if we don't trust currency alone, we don't spend any money. But too often it feels like the air that we breathe. Like there's a lot of conversations around how important trust is. And we kind of know this, but it does feel like air. Like we reach out to grab it and it disappears in our hands, but we know if we can't even function. Like we don't do anything without trust, but most of us don't think about that every day. Like I don't go down to the local coffee shop. I honestly don't even walk out in my driveway unless I trust my neighbors. Like it's just these little things, these little parts of trust. My marriage doesn't sustain itself without trust and without I think a whole look at what trust is. We know we have to have it to survive, but when we reach out to grab it, it floats between our fingers like vapor and disappears. But what if I told you that you can not only measure trust and take decisive action to build it, but also that your efforts to develop the people and leaders around you are one and the same? I spent most of my career developing a system for whole leader assessments, all contained in the Wild Trust platform that were designed to build whole leader capacity. And what we discovered over the years changed everything for us. Developing whole leaders and building sustaining trust involves more than measures of our progress. It's not just that, but measurement is so critical. It also includes a shift in our mindset and the way we actually do the hard and important work of developing ourselves and others, a methodology. So you can almost think about it like measures are necessary, our methodology is necessary, and all that leading to a shift in our mindset and our behaviors. And you imagine trying to get somewhere without a map. You may eventually stumble on the destination, but you'll likely waste time. You'll waste energy and a lot of resources along the way. And a whole and intentional leader measures what matters. And what matters is who you are becoming, and not just what you're doing, but also what you're doing. And so it's interesting to think about measurements. Why I'm so excited for our guest today, who has a lot to say about this. But let me just give you a couple of handholds as we get into this conversation. What's the purpose of measurement? Why would we measure anything? And one thing is this: it's self-awareness. Where am I now? And when I say self-awareness, I mean organizational awareness as well. Like, where are we? Knowing where we are is the first step in mapping where we want to go. And then a shared language. Like measurement actually gives people a way to talk about things that matter. About how do we talk about things we're experiencing together? It gives us progress mapping. We know this has to happen. Like we have to map our progress so that we have something to be motivated towards. How do we track our growth over time? And then the last thing I would mention, just as an idea, and our guest is going to have a lot to say about this too, is like strategic alignment. How does my development connect to the organization's direction? Oftentimes it's known as line of sight, and measurement helps us to build that line of sight. And I am so excited for this conversation today. I got to say one thing, Sab, before we launch in, is that this person, who's actually on the screen right now, kind of made me a rock star in my own home. And the reason why was that my wife, she came to my office and she's like, hey, I was in a team meeting today, and someone mentioned a Harvard Business Review article written by this guy named Dr. John Blakey. And she's literally having this conversation, and I go, he's coming on our podcast. So my wife's like, buddy, and I'm like, I actually don't, but she thinks I do because of you, John. So that's my attempt at an intro, and I am so excited for this conversation, Sam.
Yeah, let's get this wild conversation going. Welcome to the Wild Conversation, where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. Today, we get to have a wild conversation with Dr. John Blakey. He's one of the world's leading voices on trust, purpose-driven leadership, and what it really takes to build organizations people want to follow. He's a former Financial Times Stock Exchange 100 executive, a serial entrepreneur, and now a globally respected executive coach to CEOs and senior leaders across 5 continents. He's the author of The Trusted Executive, Force for Good, and Challenging Coaching. And most recently, he lit a fire with his Harvard Business Review article, If Trust is So Important, Why Aren't We Measuring It? It's calling leaders to stop treating trust like a feeling and start treating trust like a strategic asset. John lives and works at the intersection of performance, purpose, and trust. Does Dr. Blakey sound like a wild leader or what? We're thrilled to welcome him into this wild conversation. John, thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you, Sabeth. Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here. I didn't realize I'd lit so many fires in so many places, but that's a reputation that I'm keen to live up to in the coming conversation.
Yeah, we're excited for what's ahead. Before we jump in, we're going to play a quick round of wild cards. We have a deck of 52. I pulled 10. Each has a different developmental question. I don't know what question's on. In fact, I'll shuffle it right now, and we're just going to pick a number between 1 and 10. So I'll pick a number first.
You didn't tell me about this bit.
I know. Surprise.
No preparation. Mm-hmm.
This is the way we like to build trust. Don't tell them anything about what to expect.
That's right.
It's fun, and it's a way that we love to just go deep real quick with leaders all around. So, okay, I'll go first. I'll choose a number. I'll pick the card, answer the question. John, you can go next. Pick a different number, and then Rob will round us out.
Okay.
I'm going to choose 7 today.
7.
Okay. This question is, what is the bigger purpose behind every meeting on your schedule today?
What is it, Sab? What is it?
It's really interesting. You know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say repair. And what's interesting is one of the meetings is a literal, I need to take my van into the repair shop because it got rear-ended. But it's been an interesting process to think about what is that journey of repair. Sometimes it takes a really long time, but every single conversation I think I'll have today is a process of repair. Not that every relationship I have is broken, but I think it's either repairing something in me or them. All right, John, pick a number.
Okay, you've had 7, so I'm going to go 4.
All right. Number 4.
It's easier than the one you got.
Okay. Number 4. What would change if you communicated more clearly and listened more effectively?
Ooh, wow. I guess everything would change because communication is at the heart, the giving and the receiving. And if that went to a completely new level, then it would turbocharge everything that I do. And I'm a coach, so I do a lot of listening. I'm a speaker, so I do a lot of speaking. So that question is right at the heart of my passions and my vocation. So yeah, it's a good reminder.
Hey, Sab, can I do something I don't think I've ever done before? Can I have John's question?
Okay, Rob, what would change if you communicated more clearly and listened more effectively?
The reason why I wanted it is because, John, we're having one of our bathrooms remodeled. And yesterday I was with our contractor who is actually a good friend. And I was trying to describe to him where the shower handles would go. And it was apparent that after about 10 minutes, and my wife walked in, that I was completely miscommunicating one of the simplest things in the world. Like, he was looking at me for 10 minutes going, I was saying the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome, and just trying to go, no, what I mean is put this there. And then he did something different. And I do think it was on me. Like, I just could not communicate clearly. And so when you say that, Sab, I'm like, I think I would have saved 10 minutes.
So the thing that would change would be your bathroom.
My bathroom would change. It would get done 10 minutes sooner. That's right.
Then you'd have somewhere to put the towels.
That's right. Oh my goodness. That is awesome. Sabeth, thanks for kicking us off. John, I mean that. Like, when I told you about what my wife said is that, in our little world of leadership development and trust building and all of that, there are rock stars, and you were immediately a rock star, and people laugh about that, but it's true. It's like, if she was like, no way, that is so cool. And I love what you wrote in that article. And it was so critical because we had on, like, when Stephen Covey came on, and he talked about, his book in 2006, The Speed of Trust, was published. And he talks over and over again about the importance of measurement. And I talk about that, and you put that out there in HBR. That's a huge moment and something important. But before we get into all that, will you tell us a little bit about the work yourself and the work that you do, and even what's exciting to you right now?
Yeah. So the work that I do, well, since 2012, I've been on this path with trust. And that's involved 6 years of research. It's involved writing a book called The Trusted Executive. It's called setting up an organization called The Trusted Executive that was to take the theory of that research and put it into practice in boardrooms in different sectors. And more recently, it's been creating a community of practitioners who are equally passionate about this work and haven't proven how to put the theory into practice to help them go on that journey so that we can scale the impact of the work. And that's what excites me at the moment, Rob, is that I feel that with the HBR article, I'm stood at the foot of a new mountain, that it has reconvinced me that this is the time when the leadership world is ready to hear this message. There have been times since 2012 when I thought they're not ready yet. They're not ready yet. But that article coming out and the reception that I've had from that article has given me, and it should give people like you as well, this confidence that the time is now for this message, and people and leaders are ready for it. And we need to be ready, therefore, to mobilize all the thinking and work that people like you and people like Stephen Covey and people like me, many, many different people around the world who've been preparing, I think, for the day when trust becomes the number one word in the boardroom.
Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our Wild Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. We are building the largest database on the drivers of trust inside of organizations. This survey will inform growth imperatives and the necessary organizational change needed to fuel that growth. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.
Yeah. It's so fascinating, John, because I told my team years ago that it's, I used to be a surfer. I just don't surf anymore. I still could, but it's like when I say I used to, I'm like, is it used to or still am? But it's like, so I'm very familiar with that feeling of the wave coming beneath you and behind you. And sometimes when we were in these moments, like you were describing earlier on in your trust process, and just like going through this yourself and saying, the wave isn't here yet, but I know it's already important, but people may not see it quite the way they will yet. Would you say that what I told my team was, I said, the wave is coming. So our job is to be out in the swells and ready for when that wave comes to just paddle like crazy. You know what I mean? So it was yeah.
And you don't know exactly when the wave's going to come, but you can sort of feel things change. One of the ways I measure it, Rob, is that when I deliver my workshops on trust, I do a half-day session on trust for board leaders. And I've been doing that ever since 2016 when the book came out. And back in 2017, 2018, when I was delivering that workshop, I used to spend the first 45 minutes convincing the leaders in the room that there was a problem.
Okay.
And even at the end of that 45 minutes, I'd have some chief execs sat there with their arms crossed, utterly unconvinced and thinking this was complete blue sky. And I compare that with a workshop I delivered about 12 months ago. I was 20 minutes into the session, and one of the chief execs hit the table with his hand and said, "John, we know there's a problem. We want to know what to do about it." And I realized I needed to change my workshop because I don't need to spend as much time now convincing people that there's a problem, and they're ready to hear more about how to fix the problem. And that's a measure of the wave approaching, is the shift in the appreciation and appetite that you find now in board level conversations about trust. And I've waited a long time for this wave to come, as I'm sure you have. So it's sort of great, but of course that also means it's a reflection of some of the problems that we have. If
Yeah.
trust has become so critical, you were mentioning earlier before the podcast about, trust being something we take for granted, and it's like the air we breathe, and
Yeah.
and you don't notice it. The day you start noticing that you can't breathe as well
Yeah.
is a pretty serious day. When you can't take oxygen for granted anymore, and you can't take trust for granted anymore. So it's great that it's here, because we got opportunity to do some great work, but it's a measure of the challenge of the times we live in, that trust has become such a scarce commodity in a lot of institutional leadership life.
So I just one thing you brought up that got me thinking is you said that in the past, the staging and the setup for trust was more important because people needed to see the need. So you had to give them a way to practically see the need. And then you can get
Yeah.
into the rest of the meat of what it is you really want to get to. Where is that? So if I imagine the narrative in one of your talks shifting a lot of attention, let's say you're spending 15 minutes on setting up the need,
Yep.
and because they didn't quite see it, it's like,
Yep.
but they're going to, when you get them there, where is the thing now that they don't quite see that takes a little bit of them, that it's like that they need to understand? If they've gotten past, I get it that I need trust, what's the
Yep.
next thing that you're now spending more of that 15 minutes on?
So, well, I think the HBR article is the answer to that.
Yeah.
That article with its title, if trust is so important, why aren't we measuring it? I think 5 years ago, we'd have been writing an article about why is trust so important. We
Yeah.
don't need to write the article about
It's
why it's
interesting.
important.
Yes.
Yeah. We now need to write the article about how do I measure it? How do I implement a program? How do I make it intentional? How do I operationalize this word, which I already know is important? So I think that's the bit that I spend more time on. And it's the bit that people want to hear more about, whether it's in an HBR article or in a workshop or in a blog post. That's the part now that the agenda has moved towards.
Why? So let's get personal for just a moment, because I want to get back to all of that. Why is trust important to you personally today?
Yeah, my journey with trust goes back a long way. I mean, 23 years ago, I was international managing director in a FTSE 100 organization. And I'd been in that job for 2 weeks. And I was walking down the 9th floor corridor of power in that organization in the London head office on a Monday morning, where all the directors sat. And walking towards me was my chief executive, who shall remain nameless for the purpose of this podcast. But suffice to say, I wasn't necessarily wanting or expecting an ad hoc conversation with my chief executive that Monday morning. If there'd have been an opportunity to sort of disappear into the cleaning cupboard and hide amongst the mops, I probably would have taken it. But there wasn't, and he came up to me and said, "How's it going, Blakey?"
Mm.
And I said, "Yeah, it's going great. Yesterday, we'd sold the biggest deal I'd ever sold in my sector, £33 million outsourcing deal with Lotus Cars." And I said, "It's going good." And the reply I got to that was, "You think that's good, do you?" And I thought, well, here we go. I don't know whether it was naivety or bravery. I'd only been in the job for 2 weeks. So it's probably naivety. I decided to stand my ground and I said, "Yeah, I think it's great."
Mm.
And then a finger came out, went straight in my face. And I heard a voice booming in my head saying, "You know your problem, Blakey." And I thought, no, but I'm clearly going to be unveiled of a lifetime's ignorance in that department. "You're too effing nice." And he walked off, and I'm left there in a 21st century corridor of power, FTSE 100 company. And I've just been told that my biggest problem is I'm too effing nice. And I'm thinking, too effing nice for what? Too effing nice to get to the top without cooking the books. Too effing nice to lead a team without bullying them or harassing them along the way. Too effing nice to deliver outstanding results in the vaguely psychopathic world of corporate life. But what I thank that CEO for to this day is that in that moment, his words touched something very deep in my core, and something worked its way up to the surface and said, "I'm going to show you. If it's the last thing I do on this planet, I'm going to show you that nice folk who can be trusted can also be deliver outstanding results. And for
Mm.
the next 3 years that I did that job, what motivated me when I got up at some unearthly hour to go to a distant part of the global PLC empire was to prove that point. And I did prove that point. And it gave me great satisfaction to prove that point. And then I left that organization to set up my own coaching practice
Hmm.
because I wanted to find more people who wanted to prove the same point.
Yeah.
And the point that we were trying to prove is captured actually better than I captured it by an author called Charles Green on trust. And Charles Green said, what the world needs right now are leaders who rely on the power of trust rather than leaders who trust in power.
Hmm.
And that's the touchstone of my work. Do you believe that what the world needs right now are leaders who rely on the power of trust rather than leaders who trust in power? So that's the why, that's the purpose, that's where it was born in that corridor conversation. Because, Rob, I need to live in a world where leaders believe in the power of trust.
Huh.
I have to live in that world. I cannot conclude that is not true. That is not an ideal worth striving for. So it's that deeply wired in me that I have to keep banging this drum,
Mm.
because to me, it is a hill worth dying on. Like a lot of people say, it's not a hill worth dying on. Well, for me, trust is a hill worth dying on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what's powered me through 6 years of research, writing books, setting up companies, writing articles for Harvard Business Review. These things are difficult. You need a very serious and passionate why to go on that journey, and that's where my why was formed in that corporate corridor of power many years ago.
One thing that's my first book was called Dying to Lead. And something you just said, I think that is a very interesting and provocative question is, what is your hill worth dying on? And I don't mean actually dying on. What are those principles you would die for? You would give it all up for, sacrifice it all for. And it's that's that you said something profound there. I'm going to take you off road just for I want to take a 2-minute off road piece. It's something you said. My problem is I'm a meta listener, so I'm listening for what's going on beneath this. What would you say is the relationship? And then I want to come back to measurement, but what would you say is the relationship between kindness and trust? Like, what is the, and not to oversimplify it, but like, what is the dynamic between that's being you're too effing kind and trust?
Yeah. The word he used actually was nice, not kind.
Oh, is that
And
right? Okay.
yeah, to me, nice is a lazy word.
Yeah.
It's a meaningless word. But I think you're probably right that he was alluding to another word, an important word called kindness. Now, in my research on trust, where I wanted to get at the habits, the behavioral habits of this important word, trust, and what the research revealed was 9 habits, and the 9th habit is be kind.
Huh.
So I can now, I mean, if I met that chief executive again tomorrow, I could say, I'd thank him for giving me the motivation to go on this journey. And the next thing I'd say to him, I said, you mentioned to me once that I was too effing nice. Well, the interesting thing that I found out after 6 years research was that trust is the one thing that changes everything. And that there are 9 habits of trust. And one of those habits is kindness. So kindness is part of leadership. I did a session, a workshop for about 180 health sector leaders a few years ago, and we finished the session. Everybody went to get their lunch, and there was one guy sat on a table looking a bit confused. And I went up to him and I said, "Are you okay?" And yeah. He said, I've just realized that kindness is part of leadership.
Hmm.
And I said to him, "Well, what job do you do in the hospital?" And he said, "I'm a doctor." And then this worried me a little bit. But then he clarified it brilliantly. And he said, I've always known kindness was part of being a great doctor, but I
Hmm.
never knew kindness was part of being a great leader. And
Hmm.
I thought, hallelujah, isn't it a great day when you realize that kindness is part of great leadership?
Yeah.
Permission to be kind. It's not everything. Obviously, there are 9 habits and only one of them is kindness. But nevertheless, it is one of the 9 habits.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It made me think of we've done some work with people who are very focused on kindness in the past, and the concept of kindred, of treating someone as though if someone is related to you, then you treat them as if they matter. Even it doesn't mean you're nice all the time, like to your point, but it means that kindness is to treat someone as if they matter is fascinating to me. That's just where your that conversation was taking me. So let's talk about this concept of measurement for a second. You had me at hello when I first read your article, because measurement, as a scientist myself, it's something that's very important to me, and a practitioner, right? So it's not just measurement for the sake of measurement, but why is the measurement of trust important?
I think it's important because for many leaders, trust is still an important word, but a big, vague, subjective word. And we need to get beyond that if we're going to shift cultures and put trust at the heart of cultures. We would not treat other strategic variables in such a haphazard way. I mean, if you look at employee engagement, if you look at net promoter score, we have proven in the business world over the last 30 years that you can take any so-called soft variable and you can make it into a hard variable if you focus on it and create measurement and models that are empirically verified. So I don't buy, anybody who says that it's a subjective thing, you can't measure it, you're either born with it or you haven't got it, all this. To me, that's just an excuse. Because if you've got sufficient motivation and if it's sufficiently important, we can find ways to operationalize these variables, to measure them, to monitor them, to benchmark them, and to develop them. And I'm a scientist at heart, but I became someone very focused on people. But you can bring these things together. And that's what I'm offering with this work, as you are offering with your work, is to say, yes, this is a very important people issue called trust. And yes, we can operationalize it strategically in the service of performance and purpose.
I've been asking myself this in the last couple of weeks, and I'll probably never stop asking myself this, because I am a social scientist, and like you, we have that understanding that we could measure these kinds of things. But I'm asking myself, why is it that people, it's immediately apparent to them that they need to measure their financial state through a pro forma, or looking at their P&L there.
Yeah.
And what's funny though is many of them actually don't do that well sometimes. And so we've been in this process lately where we're looking at even our revenue and trying to understand, if we don't measure where our revenue is coming from, it has big implications for strategic decisions going forward, right? Like you can see, and when you can see the data, and it doesn't mean the data tells you, it's not necessarily it tells you exactly what to do, but it might tell you what not to do, or it might tell you that you're misaligned, or all these kinds of things. But I often think, like, why is it that it's a little bit of a steeper hill to climb for people to realize that they could measure things that are typically seen as internal states, you know what I mean, or measure things that are. And I'm curious about your thought on that. Like, why is it a harder convincing?
Yeah, I do have a theory on this, Rob. I believe that we're living off the trust that was built in previous generations. Yeah, I believe we haven't had to measure it or track it or operationalize it because we took it for granted, because our forefathers built it for us and bequeathed it to us for us to steward. And look at what we have done. We have allowed it to slip through our grasp. And we have to now generate it from first principles because there's no longer enough of it in the ground. So we have to manufacture this from first principles because we've used it all up. How does that fit for you? Because you've thought about this. How does that?
I'm gonna be thinking about that after this. There's a lot in that. Thinking about that, it's almost like they entrusted it to us, and not perfectly, right? It's not saying that. I'm gonna be thinking about that, John. I really will. I'm the kind of person that will be chomping on that, and maybe you and I will write something about that. It's a fascinating thing about what's going on, even in culture today, is really, really interesting. One of the things I'm curious to ask you about is that, and you had a chance to read our State at Trust at Work report, or at least see pieces of that. And I
Yep.
know you mentioned that you've actually sent that to a couple of folks. I think we're aligned, and so that made my day that might be beneficial to you or the people that you serve. Was there anything that stood out there that resonated with the things that you're thinking about or doing, or provided evidence for, or was contrary to any of it?
Yeah, the thing that stood out to me, by the way, I thought the whole thing was incredibly well put together and professional. I wouldn't have shared it in the network that I did if I didn't think that was the case. So congratulations on the quality of that work. The piece that caught my eye was I'm a big fan of 2x2 matrices.
Yeah.
Once you've got a 2x2 matrix, you've virtually got a book. So so you've got a 2x2
Yeah.
matrix in there, haven't you? Which is team trust on the one axis and organizational trust on the other axis. So you take two variables, you split them out into four boxes, and you've immediately got something rich and powerful. So you've got this strong organizational trust, weak team trust. You call that the shell of trust. You've got this high team trust, high organizational trust, the stronghold. You've got high team trust, low organizational trust, the islands of trust. And then my favorite, the low team trust, the low organizational trust is the jungle. So, I love the language, but I like also the elegance of that 2x2. And of course, then once you've got a 2x2, you can do lots of interesting things with it. And one of the things you do later on in the report is you talk about trust through the ages and you analyze these trust quadrants by age. And I thought this was fascinating, that you've got these differences between people in their 20s who are more likely to be in that stronghold of trust quadrant. You've got your 30-year-olds that go into the jungle and then they sort of re-emerge from the jungle when they get to sort of 50 and 60. So that's something I didn't research at all in terms of how trustworthiness and trust relates to age. So I found, as I say, the language, the model, and the way that then you've sort of mapped it to this aspect of demographics. Yeah, just very interesting and something I hadn't seen before in quite that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. And it was that 2x2 has been a powerful entry point for people to begin thinking about it too. As you said, it's a simple process, and there's a whole conversation around those generational people think like, why would the 20 somethings be highest? And there's all kinds of theories, and we'll be doing more research on what that looks like and why. Maybe because they have not experienced the jungle of trust yet in organizational life, so
Yeah.
it's just that experience may be coming. The 30s is kind of a tough season of life. You're having family, there's all kinds of other issues that are going on in that. One of the things that's not a part of that 2x2 that we assessed separately is that concept of personal trust. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that your leadership trust index and it measures behaviors, correct? It's measuring
Yeah.
leadership behaviors, which is such a powerful and salient. Like I can feel it. If I can see what leaders do. Much of our trust index measures what we would describe as conditions within which those behaviors occur, like
Yeah.
this internal states that, like, that's why the concept of development has this direct linkage to behaviors, right? It's like if there's certain things going on inside of me, and by the way, I'm not suggesting that sometimes behaviors don't change our minds, because there's research around that too, that it goes both ways. What do you say is the linkage between in sort of our work on trust between these behaviors that we see in a person and the conditions within them that might be predictive of those behaviors occurring? I'm using all
Yeah.
language that's going to go over some people's, way of
Well,
talking
yeah, I
about
think
it.
the way I would talk about that, I'm a coach, I work
Yeah.
one to one with chief executives,
Yeah.
and therefore I'm very focused on their character and their behavior and their formation as leaders. And where I used to get to before I'd done the research on trust, I used to get to the point in some conversations with leaders where they'd go, yeah, I get this. I get the power of trust and I want to be the trusted one. How do I do it? And I would be able to share with them some of those states of mind, if you like, or some of those characteristics. Like there's a model in trust that says, which I used to build my own research, but it started with trust is ability times integrity times benevolence. So I would say to a leader, oh, well, this is how you do it. You trust is ability times integrity times benevolence. And they're going, well, I don't know what benevolence is. What does it look
Right.
like? How
Yeah.
do I do it?
Yeah.
How do I do it? You see, these are very practical people. And so when I went into my own research, I was looking for a behavioral model and I couldn't find one. And of course, when you're doing research, that's a gap and that's an opportunity to make a contribution. So creating a behavioral based model that's where it came from, because I wanted to be able to take it to my clients and help them develop new habits. Because I'm a believer in, first you create your habits, then your habits create you.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get to make profound change? We get to make profound change one step at a time by developing new habits. So if I can create 9 habits of trust, then I'm giving people hope. I'm giving people hope that this thing is something in the same way, like I could give up
Mm.
smoking if I just had the motivation to change my habits. It's hard, it's difficult, but it's possible. I wanted people who maybe think that this trust thing is like somehow beyond their reach to go, no, it's not beyond my reach. It's difficult, it's hard, but it's possible. And I've now got a map, like you talked earlier. I've now got a map that shows me the journey I need to go on.
Whole Leaders Wild Trust by Dr. Rob McKenna is now available through major booksellers nationwide. Debuting as a USA Today top 10 national bestseller and number 11 on the Publishers Weekly list. This book, in a cultural moment defined by fractured relationships, disengaged teams, and declining institutional trust, marked a rare achievement for leadership book centered on inner work and trust building. Why does this book matter now? Organizations across sectors are navigating burnout, low engagement, and risking skepticism toward leadership. Dr. McKenna's work offers a research-backed roadmap for leaders seeking to rebuild trust from the inside out. Get your book available now through any major bookseller nationwide.
So that's why I came at trust from a behavioral stance. Now, I still put those behaviors in the context of characteristics like ability, integrity, benevolence, which are what I would say higher order characteristics. So I think the two work together. You
Yeah.
need to be able to go up and down the levels depending on the conversation and what you're trying to achieve. So there is a linkage there, but I'm naturally gravitating more towards behaviors and habits because I'm a coach.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I studied with a guy named Alan Wicker who did some of the research on the connection between attitudes and behaviors. And this is sort of a little side note for people on some of the research around that, because some people assume that it's all about mindset. If I change the way I'm thinking, that it'll change my behaviors. Others assume that if I change my behaviors, it'll change my thinking.
Yeah.
It's both and. It depends. Because it's
Yeah.
like it's why the most one of the most studied things in a general psychology textbook is cognitive dissonance. It's like if I'm doing something that's different the way that I'm thinking, I'll either change how I'm thinking or I'll change my behavior. And so I think the more whole way of seeing it for those that are listening is it's both. Mindsets matter, and that shifts in mindset, and that's typically where leader development sometimes occurs at deeper levels. But also sometimes if you, like you said, if you do different things and you establish different habits, it changes your mind. And so it's that both and in that. And I think this is why you and I are going to write some stuff together on this connection between formation and behavior, like what's going on inside of a person and within them. One of the things I wanted to ask you, and this is kind of a big final question, is this. And you mentioned this, and this is so aligned with, I'm just so curious on your response because we get asked this all the time. You said that trust measurement only works if leaders have the courage to expose blind spots. This is in your article, I believe.
Yeah.
And the discipline to respond.
Yeah.
That's a sentence that people will like quote, write down, but that's a big statement. When you think about the reality of this, trust measurement only works if leaders have the courage. And courage is not a soft thing. Like this is the guts to do something where fear is present.
Yep. Yeah.
And the courage to expose blind spots. Do you mean their blind spots? Do you mean like, what do you unpack that statement?
Yeah. Yeah. So the courage piece. The thing with trust is it's morally loaded. It's a morally loaded variable. I do an exercise in my workshops where I invite CEOs to complete a questionnaire around these 9 habits. Now, one of the habits is being honest. I've conducted that exercise in rooms around the world for the last 10 years, hundreds and hundreds of times. I can count on one hand the number of times that a leader has chosen the habit of being honest as being the habit that they need to work on. Why is that? It's not because they don't need to work on honesty, because I know from the research that 35% of staff believe they've been lied to by their line managers. The reason they don't choose it is because it's morally shameful to be the dishonest person in the room. That's why it requires courage to build trust, because it's got moral dimensions to it. There is shame associated with a lack of trust. So for leaders to expose themselves to that level of inquiry is brave, because they will find that they're not perfect. And it's not perfect on a dimension that people hold closely in terms of moral values. So that's the bit about courage. The bit about discipline and blind spots is that in my research, I found that on average, CEOs rate themselves 29% more trustworthy than the people who they lead. There's a gap. I call it the
You mean
authenticity.
then the people's ratings of them? Is that what you
Yeah.
mean? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's what I call a 29% authenticity gap. That's the blind spot we're talking about.
Yeah.
Is that, and again, you need courage to stare into that and then to act on it rather than to defend it away. These things, if we were talking about, this is where I think it's different from other variables. If we're talking about customer service and we find that we've got problems and we find that we've got blind spots, it's not an issue that provokes moral indignation.
Right.
But to walk into a room of leaders and say, hey, you know what? Nobody trusts you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a neutral conversation. That's a sensitive, morally loaded conversation. And that's why I like using different language. You talked earlier about measurement models. It creates a new language. We need a better language to talk about trust. I can't just go into a room and say to people, hey, you know what? Nobody trusts you. That's not going to get us very far. But I can go into a room of leaders and say, hey, you know what? You're great at habit number 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, but there's a little bit of a gap here on habit 7. How about we look at that? How about we put a program together to improve that? Because if we do that, your leadership trust index will go up by 0.2. And if it goes up by 0.2, we know it's going to have these positive outcomes on your business. And it's that sort of language that we need to create around trust, because if we don't work hard at that, it will slip back into the, are you saying you don't trust me? It's
Right.
like, how dare you? This is the problem with trust. It's that important that it gets deep into people's moral sense of identity.
Yeah, that's so good. You were making me think about, like, I title my book Whole Leaders Wild Trust, and then the subtitle is The Courageous Path to Personal, Relational, and Organizational Change. And that word courageous is important for me. It's important to put that there because it does take courage to tell the truth. And by the way, it's like I would almost go so far as to say, like, to be honest well is probably the deeper story, because sometimes I'm honest with someone close to me or someone I work with and they misunderstand me, and I'm like, I was being honest. And then so I've got to figure that out now. Like, how do I communicate? Back to your first question, how do I communicate this better? So it's not just spouting honesty all the time, but I've got to think about how this person even receives what I'm saying. And so it takes courage to do that. And John, golly, there's so much here. This conversation is going to keep going. Sabeth, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And before it does, John, and we get to have more conversations, we want the people who have just heard this incredible conversation between you and Rob, we want them to know where they can find the work that you're doing and how to connect with you now before we get a chance to continue this conversation here on the podcast at another time.
Great. Yeah. Well, we've been talking about trust, and The Trusted Executive is my book. All the work that I've talked about in this session has come from that research. So that book's widely available online, bookstores, etc., etc. If people want to reach out to me, then they can find me on LinkedIn, Dr. John Blakey, and they can also find me at www.johnblakey.co.uk. So I hope that gives people some options, and I'm always keen to engage with people who are passionate about this topic.
Yeah, perfect. And one last wild question before we let you go. Are you in a season, John, of accepting yourself or changing yourself?
Oh, wow. Wow. There's a humdinger. Um, I've always been in a season of changing myself, and I still am. And I hope that I always will be, because, yeah, I can't rest on that one. I've always got to be looking at my own blind spots, my own discipline, my own courage. So, yeah, I hope to stay in that season for the rest of my days.
Love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, guys. Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this Wild Conversation podcast. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.